the Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. And, well, it's mid-January now. John Rubino is back with us. Don't forget to go subscribe to his new Substack site. It is, John, tell us what it is.
It's rubino.substack.com. Thanks, Kerry. Good to get the plug out up front. Yeah.
And we'll have the link to it in the show notes on the interview, as well as we'll pin it as the first comment on YouTube, so you can get over to John and subscribe. And if you want to contribute, that's great too. But hey, this retirement thing is looking pretty good, John, and the way things are going in the world now, you're going to have to find something else to do, huh?
Well, you know, it's hard not to want to say stuff about this world because this is such a crazy place, getting crazier all the time, and so having a Substack newsletter is a really nice way to do that, because Substack handles all the background stuff, you know, all these subscriptions and all the other details, and you just sit down there and write. So I see why it's getting popular, because it's easy. And you know, I should add one more thing: the newsletter that I'm writing now is free. And eventually it'll go partially behind a paywall, but right now, whatever I'm posting for free there.
All right, that's excellent. And we're excited for you there, John. And well, let's get to the news here. What pray tell is going on here?
Well, we got some gold news, which is always nice, right? Ghana, an African country, is now buying oil with gold, and Russia and Iran are looking at setting up their own gold-backed stablecoin. So gold is beginning to be used as money again, which that's really the important point of this. And I suspect that this is just the beginning of a lot of other people experimenting in various ways, using gold to buy stuff, because that way the money that you're holding in reserve, in other words, your gold, does not depreciate meaningfully the way fiat currencies do. So while you're waiting to pay for things, the money that you're eventually going to use gets a little more valuable in fiat currency terms. So it's a good cash management system or strategy, and it's a way to avoid using currencies that are being used by their managers as weapons. You know, a lot of people just don't want to use U.S. dollars anymore, because the U.S. dollar is a weapon of the U.S. government, and that's annoying and or terrifying a lot of people in the world. So it's not a surprise to see, you know, some people using gold, some people trying Bitcoin, things like that. So there is a, you know, it's a trickle right now, but it could turn into a much more serious migration out of the big fiat currencies and into alternatives. And that's great for gold and silver.
Hey, and can't come a moment too soon with the instability that's taking place here. It's really kind of shocking here.
Well, the world is unstable and becoming more so. You know, we always expected that, and it took 10 years longer than it was supposed to. But now, you know, there's just an awful lot going on that points towards more instability. Like, you know, there's a decent chance we're already in a recession right now, and if not, we're headed into one. You know, you look at the money supply that is shrinking now, which it hardly ever does. I'm posting a thing later today that'll have charts for all of this, and the charts are really compelling. Like the chart of the M2 money supply shows steady increases for the last 30 or 40 years, and now a decrease for the first time. So, you know, if you assume the global financial system is a Ponzi scheme, which it is, which means it needs more cash coming in continuously in order to avoid imploding, then the cash isn't coming in anymore. You know, the spigot is apparently off. M2 is shrinking, and we'll see what that does to all the over-leveraged entities that are out there. But I think 2023 is a year of instability, and we are just seeing the beginning of it now. You know, it's going to get a lot worse before the Fed feels compelled to capitulate and start easing again. So that might be like a mid-year thing, but it's coming Crisis, then capitulation. That's the story of 2023.
Crisis and capitulation. Has a nice ring to it, John. All right. So what does this mean to Joe Sixpack and Steve Chardonnay here? What are they supposed to be doing here? Because you and I have our own views, but you got to do something, right?
Well, they should be worrying because basically a slowing economy, which will be accompanied by plunging consumer spending and plunging corporate profits, means lower stock prices. So, if you've got money at risk in the stock market, you might want to think that through because, in previous downturns, the final bottom in the stock market came a lot later than we are now in our cycle. So we could easily see one more big leg down as people realize that, at some point the Fed might stop raising interest rates, but they've already raised interest rates to debilitating levels. So until they cut rates, we're in bad shape. And that's a realization that'll come pretty soon. The Fed is going to raise rates again, and then they're going to raise rates a little bit less, and then they're going to stop raising rates. And
they're going to draw it out. Right.
Yeah, we'll get this massive relief rally somewhere in there. And then people will think that through and realize that that's not the good news. The good news is massive cuts, and we aren't seeing that yet. So, bad numbers leading to more bad numbers is what's coming, I think. And, as for the bond market, that's a tougher one because we've already got a dramatically inverted yield curve. And that's usually a sign that the bond market is predicting slower growth and lower interest rates, which would be good for holders of, say, 30-year treasuries or something like that. So, so we might see a decoupling of stocks and bonds where they both underperformed last year, but now it might be stocks that underperform and bonds that hold their own this time around. No guarantees there, but that could be what happens.
Yeah, my gut feel is they're playing this game like, it's like a rebel without a cause. Remember James Dean? And they're both racing towards the cliff, and he jumps out just before the car goes over, but the other guy gets stuck and he goes down with the car. Or maybe like a little Thelma and Louise sequel here, like after the car crashes and somehow Thelma and Louise miraculously survive, right? That's the kind of game they're playing.
It is. The Fed feels compelled to raise interest rates and shrink the money supply going forward because inflation was so traumatic in 2022. The financial markets are looking forward to that capitulation, so they're not tanking. They're holding up pretty well, which will force the Fed to tighten longer and harder. So yes, it's a game of chicken. One or the other is going to blink at some point because they see a disaster coming. But I wouldn't want to bet on the stock market winning that game of chicken. I think they're the losers this time around.
All right. Well, but all of this is kind of depends on what happens in Ukraine, right? If Ukraine loses, and for all we know, they might have already lost, but I tend to believe they're holding their own in this war because the war is still happening. Everyone thought it would be a 2-week affair. And everyone thought it would be a 2-week affair, and now it's, we're going on a year.
Yeah, well, the U.S. is using Ukraine as a proxy in a war against Russia. Basically, we're funneling all, basically all our military hardware into this little country in the hopes that they hang Russia up long enough for Russia to completely deplete its own military. And Russia can't just print 5 trillion new rubles or anything the way we can with dollars. So they can't just immediately restock. So maybe that takes Russia off the geopolitical board for a long time. And maybe it leads to Putin being overthrown, which the neocons in the US think would lead to a better government. There's no guarantee of that. So we're risking nuclear war in order to play some little geopolitical game with one of our adversaries. And I think it's despicable and it's terrifying. These guys, I suspect a lot of the guys making decisions about this, it's kind of a Dr. Strangelove scenario now. They have their bunkers in New Zealand or Montana or wherever. And they're going to go and live underground for 6 months in luxury while the radiation blows over. And the hell with the rest of us. I think that's, they might not say that out loud, but I suspect that's one of the things that's motivating them, because the downside for them is not what it is for everybody else. And that's just terrifying, and it's crazy. And we should never have gotten to this point. And, I think there are scenarios going forward where we have a kind of a French Revolution consequence for these guys, when people realize what they're doing and they take that revelation very seriously. And the nutcase neocons and the corporate Democrats and all the rest of these people who are pushing us into World War III get what they deserve. And hopefully it's just legal consequences, but I don't know. Hard to say what the consequences will be when the time comes.
Hey, where is Peter Sellers when you need him? Right?
Mein Führer.
He was a masterful and Dr. Strangelove, and really, I don't know if it added or detracted from the Cold War, but it sure was entertaining as all hell. So Ghana has started paying for gold, paying for oil in gold. The first consignment was 40 million. Who'd they buy it from? And I'm thinking I could go buy some oil for fiat money and then go sell it to Ghana for gold. Do they get a discount? What are the terms here? Like, do they bring a treasure chest over, or do they move it at the IMF? What do they do?
I don't know the details yet. We'll have to see. But I think it's a safe bet that when some places are paying with gold and other places are paying with dollars for oil, that the gold guys are going to get first crack at whatever it is they want, right? So we'll have that a case of, not Gresham's law in this case. Just what's the old saying? He who has the gold
makes the rules.
Okay,
that's the golden rule you're talking about.
Oh yeah, that version of the golden rule. That's right. We could see something like that in the oil market at some point if some people are paying with gold. So I don't know.
So the golden rule is coming.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, this is very early in the process, but the U.S. has, by using the dollar as a weapon, has kind of set this process in motion. And there's no reason to think that it doesn't. Oh, and Saudi Arabia is involved in this too. They're working with China and Russia now on payment systems that don't involve dollars. So there's some financial heavyweights on the other side of this argument from the U.S. So I think that it gets way more interesting from here, but we're seeing the first steps in that direction.
All right. Well, that's interesting. Now, you mentioned you see a massive shift towards nuclear power coming.
Yeah, I finished posting something like that on my Substack feed, and I didn't realize how big the shift was. Basically, here's the story. A lot of countries, for various reasons over the past decade, have decided to phase out nuclear power. Japan because they had a meltdown at Fukushima, Germany because the Greens became a powerful enough force to make that happen. But whatever the reason, a lot of nuclear power plants got mothballed, a lot of future nuclear plans got canceled, and a lot of solar panels and windmills were put in place of the nuclear plants that would otherwise have been generating electricity. Well, it turns out that solar and wind are only viable. I mean, they're great, but only in hospitable environments. You got to have a windy place for wind and a sunny place for solar. And Germany, for instance, is neither of those things. So now everybody's kind of learned that lesson. You can't trust Russia over natural gas, and you can't trust solar and wind because the weather might not be favorable. And so Germany is now burning more coal than anything else. So the Greens' plan didn't exactly work out. And everybody's going back to nuclear. Japan is going to get, they get something like 7% of their power from nuclear now. They want it up to in the mid-20s by 2030. Same thing in general terms with South Korea. They're going to dramatically increase the portion of their power that comes from solar. China is building 22 new solar plants right now, with a bunch more coming. And that means solar is going to play a much bigger role in power generation 10 years from now than today. And today's solar plants can just barely be supplied by today's uranium mines. So if we're going to double, let's say, the capacity for nuclear power in the next decade, then a lot of new mines have to come online, and a lot of existing mines have to upgrade. And to make it worth their while, the price of uranium has to go up. So that's the investment thesis. If we're going to have more nuclear power, we need more uranium. And if we're going to get more uranium, we need higher prices. So the guys who have it in the ground today will tend to get a lot more valuable over time. So, this is kind of the same thing as the silver story, really, or the cobalt story, or the lithium story. If we're going to do the things we're planning to do, we need a lot more of those things. Right. And we have to get them somehow. We need higher prices. So the big uranium miners are probably going to be very rock solid investments going forward, unless obviously if there's a nuclear war, forget it, all bets are off. And if there's a big meltdown of another nuclear plant, that also is a speed bump for the trend towards nuclear. But leaving those two things out of the mix, nuclear and by implication uranium look like really good investments going forward.
I totally agree with you. I've been a big bull on uranium for a while, but I knew it was going to go higher. Didn't know when. Sprott pulled their little stunt last year with the uranium ETF, and that just sent it off to the moon. One of my closest Starbucks buddies is an engineer who worked for the largest builder of public nuclear utility facilities, all different types. He's an expert. The costs of the new nuclear technology and the concept that it's modular and all this are overstated. You can't just plop one down and plug it into the grid and it works. The cost per kilowatt hour is enormous. So we might have just backed ourselves into a corner where we got to go back in a big way to nat gas. I don't know that there really is an alternative to nat gas, because these nuclear power plants, they're building one in Georgia now. I think it's like prohibitively expensive, but maybe they'll pull a rabbit out of a hat and maybe they will make it really modular. And then you can kind of prefab them like you do like a nuclear aircraft carrier, and you just kind of march it in, drop it down, put a pad there, put a shield around it, plug it in, and it works. I don't know. Hey, but look.
Well, Kerry, a couple things about that. One is that, when nuclear plants are incredibly expensive and they have cost overruns and stuff, that's usually a regulatory thing. So that's addressable if there's the political will. And a lot of coal-fired plants are actually, turns out, pretty good sites for nuclear plants. So we kind of already have the land.
By water.
Yeah. So it's a transition that might even capture the imagination of the environmental lobby, right? If we're getting rid of coal plants, then replacing them with nuclear plants might seem like a plus, a win-win, even though nuclear is not their favorite power source.
Right.
So, and those modular things, they're interesting. They're untested yet. We don't have them all out there all over the place. But the idea that you can just truck one in anticipation of a big storm. So if the grid goes down, you've got extra power right there waiting. And, there's stuff that you can do with those things that are really appealing, that kind of flexibility. So we'll see. But I think, the places where it's easy to build nuclear plants are going to do it. And that's going to lead to a lot of new demand for uranium, everything else being equal.
For sure. I totally agree. It's just the case might be overstated a little bit. It's not quite as simple as it sounds. But for sure, nuclear is efficient. It lasts a long time. All of these plants out there had like 20-year lives, and they're out there 40 and 50 years. and only an idiot like the former governor of New York State would actually go and shut these plants down. Their efficacy, their safety has been demonstrated over time, and we don't really have anything better. But on the other hand, there's this thing, the Tesla mega packs and things like that, where they actually store up the electricity. So when you have the blip in the grid, it can feed it back to the grid. Or you store up, battery technology basically is proving to be cost effective and might well also figure into this equation here. The one thing about a nuclear power plant is once you start it up, it's always to be avoided to shut it down. You don't want to shut it down. It's a very complicated procedure, and then you have to bring it back up. So the actual efficiency rate of nuclear power plants, they're on the grid more than any other power plants, more reliable, all those things. All right, so it's going to be interesting to see. So what about this change that they're proposing so that the CPI will lower the inflation rate and screw the retirees yet again?
Yeah, so the government is obviously, they're always out there trying to help us, and you got to admire them for that.
Sorry, I'm choking on that, but
the latest thing they're doing to help us is they're going to change the way they calculate the inflation rate. And instead of using the prior 2 years as the base, they're going to use the prior year, which means last year was massively inflationary. So this year is going to look, if you just use last year as your baseline, next year's inflation rate will look a lot lower, and that'll help us all. There will be lower inflation.
That's one way to do it, right?
Yeah. So
what genius came up with this?
And the Bureau of Labor Statistics, who are the guys who brought us hedonic adjustment and substitution and all the other ways that inflation is adjusted in ways which we can't measure, but it comes in lower. Surprise, surprise. It comes in more favorable for the government thanks to all these adjustments. Yeah, and you're right. That screws Social Security recipients, because their cost of living increase will be less than it would have otherwise if official inflation is lower. So yeah,
billions of dollars every year.
And remember, that's just in time for the presidential election. So the incumbents will be able to say, we brought inflation down from 9% to 2% when, measured by, say, 1980 metrics, inflation would be 9 or 10% again, but it's a really good campaign slogan.
That's great. I love it. Hey, well, if maybe they should just pass a law against inflation like they did against war right before World War I, and just outlaw inflation, and then we won't have any.
Okay, right? You're joking, but that's actually later in this process where that will come. Wage and price controls. They do that at the end of every gigantic monetary crisis, right before the monetary reset. So let's call that a 2024 story. When
2024, we didn't even get through 2023 yet. We're making predictions for 2024.
We're jumping ahead to stuff that's going to take a little while to come. But wages and prices will be frozen at some point.
Oh, for sure.
There will be capital controls. There will be wealth taxes. All of the crazy stuff that happens right at the end when governments feel their grip slipping and think that anything they do to hold on is better than letting go. And so that's...
I could not agree with you more.
Yeah. And
I called it 2 years ago. This would be coming. Or last year I called for wage and price controls. Mm-hmm. They're definitely coming. In the meantime, we got the Davos confab going on, but Schwab and Soros pulled out, I think, because it's getting so much heat and so much attention. They just went underground. I don't think they really pulled out,
Or they might have taken some kind of a medical treatment that has some side effects, especially on older people.
Blood, think?
Could be that one. It could be, another medical treatment that's common today that has some side effects. Yeah, you never know. You never know. So maybe we got to wish them well. I hope they recover soon. Yeah.
I wish them a long retirement that can't come soon enough. But what's this polycrisis thing that WEF is coined?
Okay, so a little background here. There's a science fiction writer named William Gibson, who in a couple of his books take place in a future world where instead of having, one crisis here and one crisis there, they all happen in one decade. A war, a pandemic, an ecological crisis, other stuff, a financial crisis, of course. And they call that the jackpot, because you know how everything comes up the same on a
all the
slot machine.
Like 3 bells or watermelons or lemons. Looks like we're getting the lemons here.
Yeah. And so 80% of humanity dies out, and the people that are left are ruled by kleptocrats, very powerful, very rich people who have the best tech and all the money. Now, meanwhile, the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, is talking about what they call a polycrisis environment. In other words, where there's a bunch of crises at once, and that lead to a die-off, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, we're going to have the jackpot. And the World Economic Forum is either predicting it or trying to cause it. And I think Gibson's vision of what comes after would be like their best case scenario, the World Economic Forums, where a handful of super rich people are the ones who survive. They have great technology, they have all the land, and the world goes forward from there.
Wow.
So it's interesting, a case of life imitating art in what for normal people would be a really disturbing way.
That is like craziness, but this is the kind of thing that they're into. And I feel good that we got all the world's private jets over in Davos, creating greenhouse gases over there, and it's freezing here in Florida. Can we get some of those private jets back and warm up the place now? I mean,
wait, can you imagine how much we could improve air quality if somebody just blew up all those planes? If somebody nuked that parking lot.
We're joking here. John does not mean it. The Swiss National Guard, please understand this is all in humor here. We don't mean it.
I'm not saying it would be a good thing. I'm just saying it would improve air quality. That's all I'm saying.
Certainly in Davos. Certainly in Davos. And finally, we don't talk about politics here because this is a family show. But your question, are the Dems trying for a two-fer to get rid of Trump and Biden for the same crime? Because what's with classified documents? It looks like if you're up there, it doesn't mean anything. Hillary Clinton had her thing with the server, and Trump has his, and Biden has his. Everywhere you look, they keep coming up with more What documents aren't classified at this point, John? Is like if they blow their nose in a tissue, is that now classified?
Yeah, if they're in somebody's garage, I think it's a safe bet that they're not really classified. They're not really secret anymore, right? But so there are two ways to look at this. One is that the Democrats are kind of hypocritical, right? Because they raided Trump's house over this thing, and they're so far they're kind of giving Biden a pass by at least not sending the FBI to his house. Or the Democrats are very smart political operators because they see a chance to get rid of Biden and Trump on the same issue while looking like they have moral consistency. They're applying the same law equally to two different people in different parties. And that way they get to run Gavin Newsom instead of Biden in the next election, which I think they would prefer, young, attractive, big state governor.
Chardonnay drinker.
Sure,
producer.
Yeah, he's a ideal Democrat candidate. And they get rid of Trump, who, that's the Democrat living nightmares for Trump to get reelected, not just elected, but elected again, and
disaster.
But see, that I like that scenario because it sets up an interesting match, because you've got DeSantis against Gavin Newsom, and two very different conceptions of how a given state, and by implication the country, should be run. I think that would be a natural choice between two coherent visions, which would, when's the last time we had that? I think maybe the Reagan years. It's been barely in our lifetimes that there's been a real choice like that. So I would like that to happen, frankly.
All right.
Even if
Well,
it means
I'm
Biden
all
goes to
ears.
jail, you know.
Hey, send them all to jail,
Yes.
as far as I'm concerned. Hey, well, that is it for this week. Make sure you go over to John's Substack site, rubino.substack.com. Sign up. He's got all sorts of content coming out there. We might just start a Substack channel of our own at some point. If you got a question for John, you can always shoot me an email, kl@kerrylutz.com. John, we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. You be well.
Thanks, Kerry. You too.